Today, we are here to discuss about the book The Famous Five Part 1. The summer holidays had barely begun when Julian, Dick, Anne, George, and their loyal dog Timmy tumbled out of the train at Kirrin Station, sunburnt and bursting with energy. Aunt Fanny waved from the pony trap, but even before they reached Kirrin Cottage, George, who insisted on being called George, never Georgina, had already announced that this was going to be the most thrilling holiday yet. She had a feeling in her bones, she said, the same feeling that always came just before an adventure exploded into their lives. And she was right. It all started with an old wooden box that Uncle Quentin, George's absent-minded scientist father, had dragged home from a jumble sale for spare parts. The children, naturally, pried it open the moment the grown-ups weren't looking. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained cloth, lay a crumpled yellowed map and a scrap of parchment covered in strange writing. The map showed a jagged island with a single word scrawled across it in faded red ink: treasure. George's eyes blazed. "That's not just any island," she whispered. "Look at the shape. It's Kirrin Island, my island." The parchment was trickier. It was written in an old dialect, half English, half something else, and mentioned ingots of gold hidden long ago by a notorious smuggler captain called One-Eared William. According to the note, the treasure had been buried, where the sun strikes the wrecked ship at dawn, and guarded by underground tunnels that only the bravest or most foolish would dare enter. Of course, the famous five were both. Within 2 days, they had provisioned themselves with tongue sandwiches, lashings of ginger beer, lemonade, hard-boiled eggs, apples, chocolate bars, and an alarming quantity of tinned sardines. "In case we're marooned," said practical Julian. George insisted on bringing Timmy, naturally, and no one argued. Timmy had saved their lives more times than anyone cared to count. They set off at first light in George's little boat, the sea glassy calm and the gulls screaming overhead. Kirrin Island rose before them like a green jewel, castle ruins crowning the highest point, waves crashing against the rocks below. As they beached the boat in the hidden cove George knew so well, a strange prickle ran down their spines. Someone else had been here recently. There were fresh cigarette ends on the sand, and a scrap of modern rope tangled in the seaweed. "Poachers, smugglers," whispered Anne, who always worried first and adventured second. "Worse," said Dick grimly, pointing to faint footprints leading toward the old wreck on the far reef. "Treasure hunters." The five moved like shadows, Timmy in the lead with ears pricked and hackles half raised. They followed the footprints across the island, past the rabbits that scattered at their approach, past the ruined castle where George sometimes pretended she was a medieval knight. The tracks ended at a jagged hole in the cliff face, an entrance no one had noticed before, half hidden by gorse and brambles. Down they went. The tunnels were damp and echoing, lit only by the torches Julian and Dick had thoughtfully packed. Water dripped from the roof. Somewhere far off, the sea boomed like a giant's drum. Anne clung to George's sleeve, but George strode ahead as fearless as ever, Timmy padding silently beside her. They found the first clue carved into the rock, a crude sun symbol with an arrow pointing left. Then another and another. The passages twisted like a maze. At one point they heard voices, rough adult voices, echoing from a side tunnel. "Quick hide," hissed Julian. They squeezed into a narrow crevice just in time. 2 men passed by carrying lanterns and shovels, muttering about getting there before those pesky kids do. The 5 exchanged wide-eyed glances. So the treasure hunters knew about the map too, and they thought the children were competition. On they pressed, deeper and darker, until at last the tunnel opened into an enormous underground cavern. Moonlight filtered through a crack high above, silvering the pools of seawater below. And there, half submerged at the cavern's edge, lay the ancient wreck of a sailing ship, its timbers black with age. The 5 held their breath. Dawn was still hours away, but they didn't need the sun to tell them they'd found the spot. On the barnacled prow of the wreck, someone long ago had carved a crude sun symbol exactly matching the one on the map. "This is it," breathed George. They worked feverishly, prying, digging, levering with the crowbar Julian had insisted on bringing just in case. Timmy barked excitedly, tail wagging like a propeller. And then clang! Dick's spade struck something solid. Minutes later, they hauled up a rotten wooden chest bound with rusted iron. The lock had long since crumbled. With trembling hands, Julian lifted the lid. Gold. Bars and bars of it, dull with age but unmistakable, stamped with strange markings. Enough to make them all gasp. Enough, as Dick whooped, to buy 100 boats, 1,000 bicycles, and ginger beer for the rest of their lives. But there was no time to celebrate. Boots echoed in the tunnel behind them. The men were coming back. What followed was a breathless chase through the twisting passages. Timmy nipping at heels, George shouting defiance, and surprisingly nimble when properly terrified, Julian and Dick hurling rocks and sardine tins like grenades. They burst out into dazzling sunlight, scrambled down the cliff path, and launched George's boat just as the villains appeared at the tunnel mouth, shaking fists and shouting threats that were lost on the wind. Back at Kirrin Cottage, Uncle Quentin nearly dropped his test tubes when 5 grubby, grinning children and 1 ecstatic dog marched in and deposited a genuine treasure chest on the living room carpet. Aunt Fanny fainted clean away, though she revived remarkably quickly at the sight of the gold. The police came. The treasure hunters, a pair of shady antique dealers from London, were arrested. The gold, it turned out, had been stolen a century ago from a Spanish galleon and hidden by One-Eared William until he could retrieve it. Now it belonged, legally and properly, to the crown, but the 5 were promised a handsome reward, enough for new boats, new bikes, and a lifetime supply of cakes from the little shop in the village. That night they sat on the beach at Kirrin Bay, eating ice creams and watching the sun sink into the sea. Timmy lay across all 5 pairs of feet, occasionally licking stray cornet crumbs from George's knee. "Best holiday yet," said Julian contentedly. George grinned, wind ruffling her short curly hair. "Just wait till next time." Because with the famous 5, there was always a next time. And somewhere out there, another mystery was already waiting. Please like, share, and subscribe.